joining me, David Friedman, and under his leadership as the United States Ambassador to Israel from 2017 to 2021, unprecedented diplomatic advances were made, including the moving of the embassy to Jerusalem, the recognizing of Israel's sovereignty over the Golan, which was so important, brokering the Abraham Accords. My goodness. For his efforts, he was nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize, should have won it, and received the National Security Medal. He lives with his wife, Tammy, in Jerusalem. His new book, One Jewish State, is, in my estimation, the most important book written on the Israeli-Arab conflict in 75 years. And I buy every book back to 1940s, so I've read them all. And this is groundbreaking. To me, it is the solution to the the Israeli-Arab-Palestinian conflict, whatever you want to call it. So congratulations, Ambassador, and I am honored to have you with me to talk about this, and we may be able to go into what would happen in Kamala's America for Israel, for Jewish America, and for, let's say, even world peace if she and Tim Walz took or were elected to office, or at least took the office of presidency. So welcome again.
Thank you. It's great to be with you. I really appreciate it.
I'm going to open up to you so that you can articulate the very foundation of this book. And what most people are going to care about is the solution. What is the framework that you are proposing?
So first, the first thing I think you have to do when you look at the Israeli conflict, the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, is to dispense with the two-state solution, because that's all anybody talks about. By the way, other than President Trump, Republicans and Democrats alike speak about a two-state solution, and I was against it from the beginning. But certainly, after October 7th, you have to kind of be crazy to think that it should still be on the table. Gaza was effectively a Palestinian state for 18 years. Israel evacuated all the Jews living there. There hasn't been a Jew living in Gaza for 18 years. Prior to October 7th, there hadn't been an army soldier there for 18 years. The Palestinians got tons of money. They had an election. They elected Hamas to be their leaders, the most ruthless terrorist organization in the world, and they got tons of money. Instead of using it to build schools or highways or beautiful beachfront hotels they could have built there, everything went into terror tunnels and weapons of mass destruction. So the idea that the Palestinians should be afforded yet another platform from which to destroy Israel is just insanity. And on the other side of the state of Israel, in Judea and Samaria, in what people call the West Bank, the Palestinian Authority is kind of the other governing body, which people say, well, they're better than Hamas. Well, they're really not, and they're incredibly corrupt.
The moderates.
Yeah, they're like, maybe like they say, the least dirty shirt in the closet, but it's a pretty dirty shirt, and you don't want to wear it. And they have one of their primary laws is a pension system where they provide enormous amounts of money to terrorists who kill Jews. They incentivize in their legislation, in their laws, terrorists to kill Jews. You kill 2 Jews, you make more than if you kill 1 Jew. It's just horrible. And so they're clearly not qualified to run, to govern. And by the way, I spent 4 years living in Israel, met a lot of Palestinians. They won't say this publicly because they'll be potentially murdered. But what they tell me privately is, please, the last thing we ever want is to be under the rule of Palestinians. These are not people that we want to live under. They're corrupt. They're not gonna bring us any prosperity, any peace, any freedoms, any human rights. And they also, this is a tiny little part of the world. They look right across into Israel, where Israel has 20% of its citizens are Arab. 20% of Israeli citizens are Arab. More than 20% of the elite universities in Israel consist of Arab students. And so they understand that the way to achieve better prosperity, better human rights, better dignity is by living under Israeli sovereignty. So it's the idea of a two-state solution. We have to just, it's an addiction, if you will, held by kind of lame political people who don't want to think. And then the question is, what do you do, right? What do you do if you don't want to have a two-state solution, which we don't? Well, then you look around, you look at this area, you look at this incredibly magnificent, biblically majestic area called that the world calls the West Bank, as if it's just a
It's Judea
kind of
and
a sandy
Samaria.
Judea and Samaria, and it is. You look at this land, which I had the privilege of making a movie about with Mike Pompeo 2 years ago. You look at this land, and you see these incredible places from Shiloh to Bethel to Jerusalem to Bethlehem to Hebron, so many other places where which are so essential to people of both the Jewish faith and the Christian faith. I mean, this is where the Jewish prophets preached. This is where Jesus would walk from Nazareth down to the temple. He was born in Bethlehem, obviously. I mean, this
David's
is where the Bible.
first throne was in Judea and Samaria in Hebron for 7 years.
It was,
So all of
yeah,
these various cities that are sort of just to the world that is not deeply steeped in the Torah and the prophets, they don't understand that this is not the Jordanian West Bank. This is actually, in a concentrated way, the most biblically, um, I guess, the
significant.
most biblical area in all of Israel. Of course, Galilee, Nazareth, and all the rest. But Tel Aviv doesn't appear. Jaffa does in the Bible.
Tel Aviv is a great city, but it does not appear in the Bible. And
That's right.
look, I would argue it's the most biblically significant place on earth. And it includes Jerusalem. It includes the eastern part of Jerusalem, at least according to the United Nations. But yeah, look, the entire Old Testament is occurred around these places. The books of Joshua, Book of Kings, Book of Samuel, the prophets preached there. And again, I'm not as fluent in the Christian faith, but obviously the historical episodes of Jesus, most of them occurred in this area as well. So the idea, first of all, the idea that Israel ought to just hand them over to Palestinians, and let's be clear what will happen if the Palestinians ever, God forbid, get complete sovereignty or control over this area. You will be watching movies of Palestinians entering these cities, with pitchforks, with flames, with jackhammers, with jeeps, destroying every single remnant of Jewish or Christian life that goes back 3,000 years, or in the case of Christian life, goes back 2,000 years. They'll destroy it all, as they've destroyed so many other holy sites of in the Christian faith. So, if that image bothers you, if that film that thank God doesn't exist yet, if that bothers you, we can't let it happen. And so, part of the book is to make sure that people finally, once and for all, put the nail in the coffin of the two-state solution. But
I
then the question
believe
is,
that
okay, well then,
I believe that the trend is away from the two-state solution now since October 7th. I'm not a Pollyannish kind of a person, but I do believe that everyone recognizes that Gaza was free in a sense, free, how you could be free under Hamas or the PA would be a question, but they were free. They were Judenrein, and they had, and by the way, in the 80s, up into the 80s, the first Intifada, Arabs were leaving Gaza and going to Tel Aviv to be on the beach. And people, I think one of the greatest problems that we have in America that comes from the school system and the ideological divide or the indoctrination there is that history, deep, relevant history, is not taught and is not connected to today, the issues today. So if you asked most Americans, well, did you know that it wasn't too long ago that Gazans came and went from Gaza and went to a beach in Tel Aviv and could drive around Israel and nobody thought anything untoward about that or was worried about that? They would look at you like, okay, prove that to me. That can't be true.
yeah. Well, that was the mistake of Oslo. It was the mistake of the Israeli Prime Minister Sharon to evacuate Gaza. This idea that you need to isolate Arabs from Jews in these radicalized territories. Think about it. Nobody's saying that Israel should get rid of its Arabs, and Israel has no interest in getting rid of its Arabs. It's very proud of the fact that it has an Arab minority. But this idea from Oslo is that whether it's in Judea and Samaria or in Gaza, they have to be, as you say, Judenrein. They have to be devoid of Jews. Now, how is that going to in any way lead to something good? All these, all these Arab communities or Arab countries, whether it's Jordan or Egypt or Syria or Lebanon, they're all failed states. I mean, they have, GDP per capita around $5,000. Israel is a first world country. It's a democracy. It provides religious freedom. And, it's got about a $55,000 per capita GDP, somewhere between 11, 12, and 20 times what all these other countries have. So all the geniuses who said, well, we got to separate the Arabs from the Jews because that's the way the Arabs will lead better lives. It was just absolutely the wrong idea. And as you point out, before any of this happened, all these geniuses came along. Jews and Arabs were living near each other. There was less terrorism. There was less violence. There was trade. There was commerce. The pundits, the foreign policy geniuses, have really messed this thing up over the last 50 years.
I call it Palestinianism because there's an ideology behind Palestinianism, and that is that the land was stolen from the state of Palestine, which never existed. Arabs, Palestinians, whatever you would call it, have never had sovereignty over a state called Palestine, or even in this area, it was always subjected to either a Muslim Arab or a Muslim Turkish empire. So it's never been anything other than a subset, a little, a county or a region of an empire. And it was never self-governing. No one can name a king, and obviously not a president, of Palestine in history because none ever existed. So this has always been Israel's land. As a matter of fact, when it was named Palestina by the Romans, who lived there? Jews. So the Jews are actually the first Palestinians. And
Yeah,
yeah, so it's sort of an ideological bent. It's not just historical illiteracy, but there is an ideology behind Palestinianism that demands. And don't you think that that leads to the fact that since at least 1929, um, that the radicals, let's put it that way, the radicals have not wanted their own state, but to replace the state of Israel. And that's still Palestinianism today, to replace the state of Israel, not coexist.
yeah, you're absolutely right, and I think that's really one of the key points here, which is that look, you can go back to Mark Twain, when he wrote his book, The Innocents Abroad, or Ulysses Grant, when they visited this land in the 19th century, before there was a large Jewish immigration coming back in, and there was nothing going on there. It was desolate. I mean, they pointed out, we're so disappointed. We thought we were going to come to this biblical, majestic place, and it's just neglected. It was never of any interest to the Arabs that were living there. Most of them were like, had left long ago. And it was only when the Jews came in that the Palestinians developed a desire to somehow be on the land. But here's what's, I think, the most important point. The Palestinian, they call themselves a liberation organization, right? But it was never about Palestinian liberation. It was never about creating a Palestinian state that would be self-governing. They never spent 10 minutes thinking about, are we going to be, a republic, a democracy? Are we going to be a monarchy? Are we going to have free speech? Are we going to have freedom of religion or freedom of worship? Nothing. No Thomas Jeffersons, no George Washingtons, no Ben, or in the case of Israel, no Ben Gurions, no Chaim Weizmanns. It was the entire movement was just about destroying Israel. All they ever cared about was to destroy Israel, beginning, as you point out, in 1929 in the Hebron massacre and continuing to this day. The Palestinian movement as a political movement is a movement to destroy Israel. It's not a movement to build a Palestinian state. And by the way, as you know just as well as me, when this was all getting put together back in the 1930s and 40s, when the British were given trusteeship over the land, not the nation, but the land called Palestine, they decided to take 72% of it and create Jordan.
I'm sorry to talk over you.
Right?
Finish your sentence.
So, I'm saying that the vast majority of the nation, of the territory, not the nation, but the territory of Palestine was peeled off, and a state was created out of Palestine called Jordan,
And a
which is
majority of
today
the people that live there are Palestinian Arabs.
exactly more than 60%.
And
Now they're not ruled by Palestinians, but that's
no,
their
a
fault. That's not
Hashemite
not
king, right? A Hashemite
yeah,
king from
right,
Saudi
yes,
Arabia or from Arabia
yeah,
because he it wasn't Saudi Arabia then. But I think that it's interesting that I believe the various white papers, every single time they were offered coexistence, their own land. First, they took 100% of Palestine and, like you said, peeled off 72 to 73, closer to 73% of it, and gave it to an Arab king. And that's where Palestinians live. So that shrinks it down to 23%. But on several of those other opportunities that they turned down, they were offered all but 5% of the original land. One of them, when I did the
yeah,
math, if you take away the 73% and give the rest to the Palestinians, there was 5% allotted for Israel. Israel was going to take it, insanely, maybe, and the Arabs said no. So what does that say?
yeah. Look, Israel was going to take it at the time, and this was 1947 when the UN voted to partition this land, because there were like a million Jews living in DP camps in Eastern Europe who were, half of a normal weight, survived the Holocaust, and no place to go. No country was willing to take them in. So Israel said, look, we got to have a state to absorb these poor people. And so they just took whatever they were offered. And the reality is that every time, at various points in history, the Arabs refused to accept Israel. They attacked Israel. Miraculously, Israel's been able to win those wars, and in the course of those wars, they were able to gain territory, as they should when they're getting attacked. They were able to create
The
finally
rules of
create borders.
war. I want to
Yeah,
point out something that I neglected to mention at the beginning when I was describing the importance of your book. One of the most, I'll say, brilliant approaches that you took was actually to speak of the biblical foundation for for your entire plan of one Jewish state, because Christians speak of that all the time. I mean, if those who support Israel, if they know their scriptures, Joel, Jeremiah, chapter 31, I mean, you can go Isaiah, you can just go through all the prophets and of course the Torah, Moses, but over and over and again, the land is given to, well, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Israel, the 12 tribes, and it is a covenant that is irrevocable. It cannot be taken away. And the Apostle Paul, whose real name was Shaul, in Romans, lists the various things that the Jewish people or Israeli people at that time still held. And this is many, many years after Yeshua. He said that the covenants, the promises, the adoption, the list of approximately 9 items, the giving of the Torah, the line of David, the fathers, everything. He lists that, and he says in present tense, these are, this is what Israel is, and the Jews. This is what they are. So it is absolutely affirmed in the Gospels and the Apostles' writings. So you take a biblical, obviously, I don't think that I remember you referring to Paul or Jesus's words, but you take a biblical stance, but you're an ambassador. You're not supposed to refer to the Bible for any kind of support for foreign policy, are you? I mean, isn't that weird?
well, I mean, I'm sure people will agree with that, but I don't. And look, our country was created under this whole revolutionary notion that we're all endowed with certain rights granted to us by our Creator. That's in the Declaration of Independence. I didn't make this thing up. I mean, this is the founding of our country, right? Now, how did they know? How did they know that life, liberty, and happiness were rights that were endowed by our Creator? Well, they read the Bible. Right? That's where it's, there's references to all those things. I won't take you with it now. I think it's in my book, but I mean, life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness are all values that God granted, to all His people, and so to say, oh, the Bible's got nothing to do with America. I mean, the Bible is the foundational book upon which America was created, and it was the Bible provided literally revolutionary changes that the idea that human rights come from God as opposed to the sovereign is what makes human rights immutable. You can't take them away because they're given by God. What an incredible concept. That's, I think, the core of how America was founded and became and continues to be a great country. We lose that. We get more untethered from that, as I think we are, unfortunately, now. I think that's where we slide back into being, not being the great country that we were destined to be. So yeah, look, I don't make any apologies for thinking that the Bible matters. By the way, I think it sells. I looked this up. It sells 20,000. It sells, I'm sorry, 2,000 copies an hour, and 20 million copies are sold in America every year. So I'm not ready to abandon the Bible as at least a good source, maybe the most important source, especially for this part of the world, especially for this part of the world.
Agreed. So God gave Israel the land. They have lived there, Israelis, Jews, Judeans, for 4,000 years, if you go back to Abraham.
Hmm.
Yeah, 4,000 yeah, thank you, Elizabeth, doing your math. And 3,500 years I count to Moses in my timeline that I use. And they continued to remain there, always in various levels of population, but they continued there. They never gave up their belief, I mean, their sovereignty in their own land. You can be oppressed, you can be invaded, you can have your sovereignty made ineffective, but if you don't give it up and walk away from it, which never happened, then it's still yours. And what you're saying is, in 1948, on May 14th, when the Declaration of the Statehood of Israel was announced, um, that sovereignty was restored or made official again. I mean, you can nuance, you could talk for 15 minutes on that. We won't. But the sovereignty was reestablished at that time as the state of Israel on May 14th, 1948. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, I mean, like the Declaration of Independence of Israel is very clear that it is restoring Israel's complete sovereignty over the land given to them, by God in the Bible. I mean, that's in the Declaration of Independence. So it's yeah, no, there's no soft selling that. It's at the core of Israel's creation, and on top of that, look, I will show you a prayer book. Pick a prayer book anytime from the year 100 until today. The Jewish people have prayed. Those who have not been, those who were dispersed, those who were evicted from the land, and I would say there were times when there was times when most Jews were in exile. Okay, you're right that there's always been a presence, but there were times when most of the Jews were in exile, and they all prayed to a person. They prayed to God 3 times a day for God to return them to Jerusalem, for God to return them to the land of Israel. I mean, fervent prayers of 2,000 years. Nobody ever gave it up, and so that's what that was so striking about Israel's independence, that it was the fulfillment of 2,000 years of prayers. It was the fulfillment of the prophecies of Isaiah, of Ezekiel, of Jeremiah, even Moses before, who never got a chance to enter the land of Israel. In the book of Deuteronomy, he predicts that there will come a time when the Jewish people will be exiled from their land. But he says to them, don't give up. God will find you wherever you are. He will gather the exiles from the four corners of the earth. He will bring you back to the land. So this has been a core principle of faith for the Jewish people since there've been a Jewish people.
And
And
no, go
yeah,
ahead.
go ahead.
Go ahead. Well, I was going to say that you probably know this, of course, but the founding fathers in all of their writings, and they wrote a lot, referred to Deuteronomy more than any other writer or work or book of all. No, not John Locke, not Montesquieu, Moses in Deuteronomy, which is
Yeah.
my favorite book. So yeah, those last chapters, anybody who hasn't reread Deuteronomy, let's just say 30 through the end, go back, and that's all the education you need. Now, let's go on from what we've been talking about to the American State Department, the presidencies that we've had in place other than Trump, who have undermined the idea of the sovereignty of Israel's right to make internal decisions, um, and to defend itself. I mean, to varying degrees. President Trump, of course, was the one president that upheld that sovereignty and treated Israel with the respect of a true friend and ally. I'm concerned, as I think many, many people are, and so is President Trump, that if Kamala Harris enters into the Oval Office and starts issuing executive orders, we're in trouble. Those of us who care deeply, 75% of Americans, that America's ally is Israel and that we must support Israel. And I want to get your take on this because there's some very, very in the last 3.5 years, some very, very uh, scary policies that have taken place, executive orders that have happened, and even hints from Kamala Harris, which was walked back by her staff, saying that she would be open to discussing an arms embargo. And then that was walked back like practically the same day. But that kind of, to me, revealed something. What do you think the prospects for Israel will be should Kamala and Tim Walz take office?
I'm petrified of that possibility. We have a saying in government that personnel is policy. Look at the people who leaders surround themselves with. She and Biden have put together almost a dream team of Israel haters within their staff. I mean, whether it's people that have been stationed in Israel, people who are stationed in the State Department, people who are she has an Arab outreach advisor who's said incredible anti-Semitic things. There's just a long list. I mean, Robert Malley, who they appointed for their as one of their Iran czars, who's since been suspended because he broke a bunch of security clearance issues. But he's also this is Yasser Arafat's godson. I mean, this guy's dad and Arafat were incredibly close. I mean, these are the people that they're surrounding themselves with. I mean, I could go through the whole list. It's really scary. I mean, really scary. Arab Muslim leaders in our country in high-ranking positions that truly hate Israel. So, I mean, her instincts are going to be terrible. Like you saw, she went to a sorority lunch instead of sitting, in her designated seat as the vice president when Prime Minister Netanyahu addressed a joint session of Congress. She's talked about arms embargoes. At the debate, she talked about the importance of a two-state solution. You got to understand that, if you ask an Israeli leader, what is your most important asset, your most important strategic asset over the last 50 years, they will tell you it's the relationship with the United States. That relationship is critical. Now, look, Netanyahu was very skillful in navigating the Obama years. It was very challenging, very difficult. He made the deal with Iran. He empowered Iran. There's only so long you can keep all these balls in the air. A Harris presidency, and she's not only is she her instincts are anti-Israel, but she's not smart enough and not fluent enough to know how those instincts will damage enormously, not just Israel, but the United States as well. So she will get a lot wrong. I mean, Biden's gotten everything wrong, and I think you have to attribute Biden's policies to her as well. Look at Iran. Iran had about 150 to 180 billion dollar GDP when we left office, and their architect of terrorism, Qasem Soleimani, we had him executed. We leave office. The Biden administration does not enforce secondary sanctions on Iran. They're able to sell oil as much as they want to China and Russia, which is itself crazy because we're supposedly helping Ukraine defeat Russia, but we're allowing Iran to sell oil to Russia. So again, none of this stuff has any coherence to it. But Iran's GDP now is like $450 billion, way more than double what it was when we left office. They've taken all this money. They funded the Houthis, funded Hezbollah, funded Hamas, and then they try to handcuff Israel from defending itself by saying, don't go into Rafah. You remember that? She said, I've read the
All eyes
maps.
on Rafah.
Yeah. All eyes on Rafah. I've read the maps. The map of
that
Rafah,
was
by the way.
that was hysterical. I didn't catch that when she said, I've examined the maps, or I've read the maps, and I'm thinking, okay, you didn't go down to the border because you said you hadn't been to Europe, but please, why haven't you gone to Israel if you really wanted to know the geography?
Look, by the way, the map of Rafah, I could draw for her on a napkin. I mean, it's not like she.
It's not that tough. What the map does tell you is absolutely an essential strategic fortification there. I mean, they have to be in Rafah. They have to be on the Philadelphia corridor, or else they will have another October 7th.
They would have lost the war. It would have been a loss for them. Can you imagine Israel losing the war if they didn't go into? By the way, when they ran into Rafah, they were able to rescue 5 hostages. Unfortunately, they lost 6 more later on that were just executed in cold blood by Hamas. And they also discovered the smuggling routes from Egypt into Gaza, which had they not discovered those, there would be an endless supply of weapons. So everything that they've asked, everything that Biden and Harris have told Israel to do in this war, first of all, it's been inappropriate meddling, in Israel's ability to win this war. And second of all, the advice has been wrong.
It's been
all
wrong.
The advice has been wrong.
It's been wrong. And, she just recently to the, I'm going to get this name wrong, National Association of African American Journalists, but that's probably not the exact name of them. But in the interview, she actually said that she supported the embargo on the 2,000-pound bombs to Israel. I know that it's not just those bombs that are being embargoed. Not only do I believe that it's illegal for Biden Harris to do this, but that was very troubling because, I hate that word troubling, that was disturbing because because it shows that she is open to that. She supports it. And I believe that she is just withholding. I think that was probably an afterthought and she didn't really think about it because she's trying to say she supports Israel. But it is very clear from her statements and her actions and inactions, her condemnations of Israel, equating them with terrorist states, both sides kind of a thing. But to withhold 2,000-pound bombs from Israel when they're also facing Hezbollah is a complete betrayal of our relationship. Am I right about that?
Yeah, look, Elizabeth, she doesn't support Israel. To say that Israel has the right to defend itself is a meaningless platitude. Tell me one country in the world that doesn't have the right to defend itself after it's been attacked. It's meaningless. It doesn't have any meaning. You can't take that and extrapolate that to mean any particular support in a particular war. It gives her the wiggle room. She's trying to kind of pull the low-hanging fruit among the kind of left-leaning Israel supporters, but while at the same time signaling to the pro-Palestinian crowd, which he's very interested in soliciting, don't worry, I'm not going to support him too much. I mean, I'm just going to support him enough to get the selection under my belt, and then. And then I think she's going to turn on Israel. She's going to say, look, there are people today in her group that are condemning what Israel did in Lebanon, right, with the pagers, right, which was the most creative, the most accomplished, anti-terror act that probably we'll ever see in our lifetime. Specifically targeted, you target the pagers. The pagers are only given to the terrorists, right? So you're targeting the terrorists. You may have 10, non-terrorists that might have gotten, some shrapnel, which is, in the context of a war is nothing. I mean, what I'm hearing from Israel is that with no soldiers on the ground, with no bombs being dropped, they managed to strike a massive blow to this terror organization that, by the way, is responsible for the murder of hundreds of Americans. The Marine barracks, the U.S. Embassy in Beirut. I mean, they have killed. They have on their hands the blood of hundreds of American soldiers. And so Israel comes along, manages through this incredibly clever
James
technology
Bondish.
to and the Harris camp is saying, this isn't really what you should be doing. You should really be trying to get a ceasefire. Israel has said to America, look, get us a ceasefire. We don't want to take over Lebanon. Please get us a ceasefire. Exercise your leverage. You've got massive leverage over Iran. You could start enforcing sanctions on Iran. You could get them to a place where they'll listen to you. Instead, they send this guy up to Beirut. He begs for a ceasefire. They laugh at him. He goes home. And these are inept people. I mean, this is the Middle East. Okay, Middle East. You show up there. You're strong. You're tough. You make your demands, and you back them up with strength. That's not how they do it, and she'll be a disaster.
Oh, yes, she will. And it does never cease to amaze that those who are on, I would just say, I guess, term it to be generic, on the other side from what my position would be, they actually don't hear us when we say you can't send wimps and wusses and fearful, timorous men and women to go negotiate, and you don't actually say what you're going to give up before you go in, and you don't act like just a complete, childish, I don't know, moron, and go into the Middle East.
Yeah.
I mean, it is about strength. And why can't they understand this? I think it's because they're held back by ideology too. They are held back by ideology. President Trump. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say to you, just to tell you a story, because I think your audience will appreciate this. When we were in office, Chairman Kim in North Korea was holding 3 Americans hostage, and the president sent Mike Pompeo to North Korea, and Pompeo gets and meets with Chairman Kim, and he says, "Mr. Chairman, you are holding 3 Americans hostage. The president has directed me to tell you that when I leave here in 2 hours on my plane, he expects those 3 hostages to be on the plane." And he left, and that was it. And you know what? 3 hours later, the plane leaves with the hostages. They were freed. Okay? I mean, it was an amazing thing. That's how you do it. Okay? And with someone like Trump, because no one knows what he's going to do next. Like, nobody wants to insult him because he's unpredictable, which is critically important in this part of the world. And Kim didn't want to take the chance. And so he said, you know what? I don't want to risk this guy. Who knows what this guy's going to do to me? And so he let go of the hostages.
Dictators understand fear and terror and extreme words and actions because that's what they employ. And so when they see an American president who's speaking strongly and is not going to back down, he's making that very, very clear, they respect it because they fear. They understand fear. Yeah. They try to instill it, but they also can feel it. President Trump has said something a couple of times. Some people have objected to it. I'm agnostic. He has said if Kamala Harris you'd probably say Kamala. If Kamala Harris is put into office, Israel will be done in 2 years. I want to ask you this. I'm thinking that the president is, in his mind, considering the fact that Kamala will pull back, maybe embargo weapons to Israel, pull back its support, but mostly push for a 2-state solution, which, if anyone still is unclear, a 2-state solution means a 1-state because it means the annihilation of Israel. There is no 2-state solution. Right. It's the first step to the complete obliteration of the state of Israel. I think that he's referring to that overall idea that they will push for a 2-state solution. I personally don't know how that can be forced upon Israel, but I've seen pretty crazy things happen. So tell me what you think about President Trump's comment there and what you think's behind it and what you think the inevitability would be.
Well, look, I think he said he hopes he's wrong, and I certainly hope he's wrong. And I think there's a little bit of hyperbole in there, but I think what he's talking about is Israel's fighting a 7-front war right now. A tiny little country the size of New Jersey fighting a 7-front war. That means, you're fighting a war in Camden, New Jersey. You're fighting a war in Trenton, New Jersey. You're fighting
New York.
A war.
You're fighting in New York.
I mean, it's a challenge. Israel, has this incredible armed forces, heroic. I mean, they're like ours. They're like our soldiers. I mean, incredibly brave, patriotic. Just they will fight and they will die if they have to for their country. And they're doing great all around. But it's a seven front war. And I think what he's saying is that you're fighting a seven front war, and you are at this point still at the mercy of the United States for ammo, for diplomatic support, for other military and economic support. Israel needs America right now very badly, and so they're fighting this war, and all of a sudden Kamala Harris says, "Look, you want something from us? Fine, you're going to have to give us a two-state solution." And maybe, depending upon how the politics in Israel goes, I don't think Israel will ever get pushed into it. But, there are some leaders who may say, maybe the public says, look, they'll elect somebody who can be friends with Kamala. And it could head in that very dangerous direction. Look, I do think that God will protect Israel, and if we need miracles, we'll get miracles. But the president's right. I mean, this is Israel's most important asset, his relationship with America. What he's saying is that under Kamala Harris, that relationship is going to deteriorate to the point where that asset may no longer exist. And Israel, since 1948, I mean, they've had fights with other presidents. They had issues with Johnson. They had issues with Nixon, although ended up being really terrific. They had huge issues with Jimmy Carter. I mean, they had issues with Eisenhower. I mean, but there was always that fundamental kind of baseline relationship that you could count on. That could be gone under Kamala Harris, and Israel's never been forced to defend itself, with real daylight between America and Israel. I hope that never happens.
That's a
But
catastrophe.
that's a challenge.
Yeah, it is.
It's a catastrophe.
There's so much to talk about that we sort of got off from your plan for under one
Mhm.
Jewish state, and I think that that's essential. I think it'll be shocking to a lot of people because they haven't thought about this. Be shocked because the two-state solution was never a solution. It was a delusion. And the two-state solution has been dead for a lot longer than October 7th, 2023. It was dead during the second intifada, I would say. So go ahead and tell us
I agree.
what that framework looks like with Palestinian or Arabs residency and a national versus a local vote. Those are things that I find very interesting.
Sure. So look, we start off with the idea, which we talked about already, that Israel will expand its sovereignty to the entirety of Judea and Samaria. Under Oslo, Judea and Samaria was divided into areas A, B, and C. Get rid of all that. Israel, I hate to be trite about it, but really, this is from the river to the sea. Israel will be free, right? It's
hmm
the flip side of all the hatred that
Gosh,
we're
I
hearing
say
from
that.
from.
That's weird.
Good. Keep saying it. Uh, so once Israel has sovereignty, now what does it do? How does it handle it? So, economically, I think we need to expand the Abraham Accords and convince our partners in the Gulf that have been blessed with lots of wealth that instead of pushing for a state, what they really want to do is empower Palestinians to lead better lives. So help Israel create more infrastructure, roads, highways, hospitals, schools, take more control over the schools so they're not teaching hatred. Bring the education level to a place where people can go to universities and lead better lives. So that's sort of the economic side of it. Security side, what Israel's going to have to do is, Israeli security is already there. The army's already in this area, so it's not like you'll see tanks coming in. The Israeli army's been there since 1967, but the idea is that while the army in the past had just been a security force, now you create a political force where in addition to sticks, you have carrots, right? You have the ability to incentivize, the Arabs to be peaceful. Now, it's not an overnight process, but through this process, what you're doing is you're weeding out. You're saying, okay, look, you guys, you want to live with us in peace. We will bring your standard of living up to a level unseen anywhere in the Middle East. You want to kill us? It's your choice, but we're going to kill you first. Okay, those are the choices, right? And through that process, through carrots and sticks, we'll end up. It's the only way I think to de-radicalize the population. Now, what do you do about demographics, right? You can't swap a security risk for a demographic risk. You can't all of a sudden, take over, 2.5 million Palestinians and say, okay, guys, go elect a prime minister, who will not support the idea that Israel's a Jewish state. So, without in any way affecting the rights of the Israeli Arab citizens who will continue to vote, we look at these communities that will be taken over by Israel, and we say, look, is there any other place in the world where you have permanent residency without the right to vote? Well, the answer is lots and lots of places. You also have a biblical concept, right, where people who moved to Israel who were willing to live in peace with the Israelite nation were granted permanent residency and the right to live there forever, and their children and their children's children. And then you look at America, right, which has a whole bunch of places that fall into that category, like Puerto Rico, Guam, American Samoa, where they don't vote in national elections, but they do have local autonomy. Now, someone may say, well, why would anybody do that? Well, like, why do the people in Puerto Rico agree to be a U.S. territory but not to vote for national leaders? Very simple. When there's a hurricane in Puerto Rico, right, without FEMA, without America, Puerto Rico would be underwater. So there are reciprocal benefits. So